welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. But today on the show, we've got something special for you. We just wrapped up the top 10, well, a bunch of top 10s, honestly. Top 10 of 2024, top 10 scores, top 10 films of the decade so far, all these top 10 list episodes, but we got one more for you. This is actually a crossover episode with the Film Scorer podcast, and we are talking about the top film scores of the 2020s so far. This is kind of a companion piece to the episode that just came out on Friday about the top films of the 2020s so far, and just seemed like it would be a fun thing to do. Obviously, I am a film music composer. I'm actually going to be scoring 3 features this year, and so film music is always very close to my heart, and so it's always fun to talk about when I get a chance. And when Nick from the Film Scorer saw that I was doing a top films of the decade so far, he got in touch. We decided, hey, maybe we should do this, and I think it came out great. Really fun conversation coming up here. So this will be on both the Film Scorer and on Piecing It Together, and yeah, it's great, fun conversation coming up. So before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod, and don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies that we talk about here on the show. And since we're talking about music, I guess I should also plug my music website, bydavidrosen.com, where you'll find everything about me and my music and film scoring and my albums of instrumental music and my albums of songs about my pets and just all the stuff that I do music related. You can find all of my music on, Apple Music, Spotify, all those places, Bandcamp. But you can find links to all that stuff at bydavidrosen.com. And so now let's get into our favorite film scores of the 2020s so far.
Dave, I'm glad we could do this. It was kind of a random decision off the cuff, but let's give our quote expert opinions on and I use this very loosely, the best scores of 2020s so far.
Absolutely.
Whenever I say the best scores, whether it's like a year or a month, I always preface it by saying what I really mean, it's my favorite scores, because people like talking about the subjectivity of art can get really, and maybe rightfully so, defensive about what's actually best.
Yeah.
Like, how do you judge it? Going into it, that's my mindset here.
Yeah, I agree completely because, honestly, I'm just somebody who started a podcast, 8 years ago, and, I don't think that my opinion is necessarily the right opinion on any of this stuff. But that being said, I do love the scores that we're about to talk about, or at least, my 10, and I'm sure that there'll be some on your list that I love as well. There might be some that I don't like, who knows, we'll see. But I don't know, that would be weird. I'd imagine that there's probably not any that are like, oh God, how did you pick that? But yeah, no, it'll be a fun thing to get into. And, on Piecing It Together, we just did a top films of the decade so far. So, why not? I always try to bring things back around to film scores, even though Piecing It Together isn't specifically a film score podcast, but me being somebody who composes music for film, it's always something on my mind anyway.
Yeah, and plus it was, maybe a month ago or so, you did a best scores of 2024 episode
Sure.
anyways, so the timing works out quite well.
Absolutely. And I do want to apologize to your listeners, my listeners, anyone really who is about to find out that my list is kind of 2024 heavy. I did go back and listen to a lot of stuff from over the last 5 years, but I don't know, I guess 2024, I try not to do the recency bias thing, but at the same time, I was going back over and I'm like, I can't help it. These are just the ones that are really sticking with me. So
What's really funny is I was almost the exact opposite. I only added some 2024 scores at the very end where I had a couple slots that maybe 6 scores could have fallen into.
Sure.
And I was like, let's throw these 2 in. I set my 10 and was like, all right, I'm not touching this.
Right on. Yeah, it's tough. longevity is certainly a factor that you want to come into deciding what you think is the best. But at the same time, I'm going through these lists and I went through all my top tens of each year. And I'm like, I still like that score, but at the same time, these ones, how could I not pick these ones? So that's my little asterisk at the beginning here.
Fair enough. All right, so my first one, and these are in absolutely no order whatsoever, other than the last two are 2024 scores because I tacked them on at the end. So the first one, maybe the most controversial one, but we'll start off with a bang, is Blonde by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis. I feel bad for the score because I know this film was so controversially received when it came out that I think the score got kind of thrown by the wayside, even though you've got Nick Cave, Warren Ellis, two huge names in film scoring and in music in general. What I love so much about the score is, one, it doesn't really care about being completely anachronistic. Like, it's a film that takes place in, the 40s, 50s, 60s or something, completely ignores the period setting, and instead has this really, the way that I always describe it is it lives in these two worlds. The world where Marilyn is, having these great grandiose fantasies and dreams, and then the world where it's all falling apart, crushing her personally, mentally, physically. And I think even though this was another score that was totally ignored, their score for the Amy Winehouse film from earlier this year was kind of a nice companion piece to that, where it's both inhabiting these really troubled women.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually haven't seen the Amy Winehouse film yet, but Blonde, though, is a movie that I did enjoy, even though I know most people really, really hated it. And I actually had it as an honorable mention. I don't know if we'll toss some honorable mentions later, but sure. I agree with you, though. It's a great score. And for a movie that central idea is to put you in the shoes of this person who is just having the weight of the entire world thrown on them, it really does feel that way listening to that score. And it's a very heavy one and really fantastic stuff. And it's a shame that it kind of got trounced underneath along with everybody disliking the film. But yeah, great work there. I will say my list, I did put it in a 10 through 1 order, although as with any top 10 list, I actually literally was rearranging them before we got on this call. So, take with that what you will. I'm going to start off with the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score because I really couldn't decide which one fit best. I mean, I think my personal favorite of the last 5 years, they do so damn much, but would probably be Bones and All. But I also really love pretty much everything they've done. I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles score, which I think is really fun and more upbeat than a lot of their stuff. The one I am going with, though, I said it's going to be very 2024 heavy, is Challengers as my number 10 here. I think we've come to know what we're going to get kind of when we see, there's going to be a Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score. But then Challengers comes out and it's like, oh, you could do that too? We know that they are, heavy in an electronic and industrial and all that kind of stuff that they came from with Nine Inch Nails, but you just don't really expect them to go that deep into it with a film score. And the fact that they did that and it actually works really well, I know that also is kind of a controversial opinion. I know a lot of people really did not like this score, but it's so daring and audacious and it just fits the film so well. I can't picture Challengers with a more traditional score. It's just, I don't think it would be the same movie. And I think Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross knew that. I think Guadagnino knew that going into it. And I think it's ultimately the right decision. And the fact that he would trust them with a score like this and that they would trust themselves in doing a score like this is why I think it belongs on this list.
I really love their composer-director collaboration with Guadagnino because I think it's easy for them to kind of sit back and do what's comfortable for them in other situations. But with Challengers, you mentioned Bones and All, I think he pushes them to do more. And
yeah.
I really love Challengers too. I think for some people, if you don't immediately buy into the film being a full-on maximalist experience from start to finish, the score is just not going to work. But
sure.
If you don't buy into that, the film's not going to work for you either.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a very unique movie. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. But what do you got next?
All right, I've got Drive My Car by Eiko Ishibashi. So I think compared to some people that talk or write about film music a lot, I don't necessarily think about it strictly from the narrative plot A to B to C sense. And like,
Mhm.
I think in a lot of ways that's like a very 19th century viewpoint in how that the music works. But film as a medium is so much more than just like a plot delivery system. So, Drive My Car, there's really in the film itself, the music isn't used that often. I think the first cue comes in maybe around the main title drop, which is like 45 minutes in.
Sure. Yeah.
But despite all that, the music carries with it so much emotional baggage and weight that I was listening to it again a couple months after I first saw the film. And maybe because it was a little late at night, it had a different impact. But I was listening to it about halfway, 2/3 of the way through, and there's that really melancholic jazz going. You're hearing car sounds in the distance, and it was just this massive wave of melancholy that hit me.
Mm.
And it was just such an incredible impact that the emotional strength of that in what is a fairly restrained score, something like I was just floored by. I couldn't overlook it.
Yeah, no, it's a great pick. It's definitely one of those scores too that you can like really just sit and listen to like
Yeah.
very easily. It's a really great album on its own, and really, really a great pick here to include. I'm gonna go kind of like the polar opposite of Drive My Car though for my next one. I'm going with Gretel and Hansel from composer
Ooh.
Rob, which I could be wrong here, but I think I might have like become aware of you and your podcast and stuff from a review you did of this score. But yeah, this was one of the last films I saw in the theater before the whole 2020 pandemic lockdown and all that kind of stuff. And it was an early favorite of mine, the film and the score, right from the beginning of that year. And I kept banging the drum for it all year long. And now finally, Osgood Perkins is, he's the golden child of horror right now. But I still think Gretel and Hansel is one of his best films, and I think this score is just fantastic. It combines all these like very folky fantasy elements and blends them with just very over the top synth work, lots of arpeggiated synth stuff going on that kind of creates a really cool atmospheric, soundscape that's really all its own. And I've liked a lot of the scores for, I like the Longlegs score. I thought The Monkey was pretty good this year, the
Yeah.
score for that. But I hope Osgood Perkins works with Rob again sometime because together they really made something where the music is just as important as everything else that he does visually to just really make a creepy and unique atmosphere.
It's funny you mentioned that, like, as the way that you might have found out about my podcast and website and all that. I love that. I can't believe I totally forgot about the score until you just mentioned it. But yeah, that score is killer. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of something like A Field in England, where you have what is like a period film, but
Mhm.
the composer's like, yeah, we're going to throw in all sorts of weird synth because there's more than just the period element here. And yeah,
Sure.
it totally leans into what becomes like a whole load of psychedelia. And I actually read an interview with Rob about that film, and I think at one point Osgood Perkins told him like, "Yeah, the studio's not really paying attention to this movie, so let's just go crazy."
Oh,
And
wow.
there you go. I mean, it totally makes sense.
That's like the dream as a composer. Like, hell yeah. Love it.
All right, my next three picks are all gonna be super mainstream normie picks.
Mm.
So the first one, Oppenheimer, Ludwig Göransson. I would so love to experience that film with literally any other score because you almost don't realize it when you're watching it, but it is what 3.5 hours of basically nonstop music, what feels like nonstop action, even though it's mostly just guys talking in rooms and
Sure.
guys talking outside. And I think so much of that is down to Göransson's score that is, again, really maximalist, really pushes the pace, really pushes the viewer along, the scenes along, keeps you strapped in, but it never really feels overbearing. I know, look, some people did complain about that, but that's their problem. I thought it creates that perfect balance of creating the pace of the film, but not taking you out of it either. I mean, I'm also a huge Tenet fan of both the score and the
Nice.
film. So I really think that this is like a collaboration that is incredible. The Odyssey, I don't know if Goranson's been officially announced, but of course he's going to score that too. So, we're going to have like a maximalist historical fantasy epic coming from him. Like, what more could you ask for?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what that turns into, because that could be really, really special. I'll be talking about Oppenheimer a little bit more later. So
All right.
yeah. My number 8 is a movie the score was my number 1 back in 2021. It's The Last Duel, Harry Gregson Williams, the Ridley Scott film, which is very underappreciated, by the way. But I do think I maybe had it a little too high back when that came up. Re-listening to it, I was like, this is just a really good score. And like, it does exactly what you'd expect from this kind of movie, especially this kind of movie from a Ridley Scott. It fits right in with all of his other epics, but it's just done really, really well. I think the main theme is what kind of bumped it up for me back in 2021. I just think it's so memorable and so exciting and just cool. And so, like, I don't know, it just really connected with me back then. And I, again, still think that it is a great piece of music. It doesn't reinvent the wheel necessarily, but it's just a kind of perfect version of that kind of score that we all kind of grew up loving. I mean, I feel like anyone of a certain age range, Gladiator was like an early favorite score for any of us, stuff like that. And this just kind of takes that and just does a really great job of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I totally agree there. That's one that, not on my list, but I think it's a great one. Great entry into that genre that, like, you don't really get films for anymore. You're getting maybe one a year, maybe one every other year. So it's such a great execution of that. And it's also just like really refreshing having like a historical, I wouldn't say epic, but like a historical medieval set film with that type of score. He's really good at that. I mean, if you listen to Kingdom of Heaven that he did, that's a great one. I don't want to name drop too much because I'm going to come off as really annoying, but that was that was one of the first kind of big interviews that I did a
Nice.
few years ago, was with Harry Gregson Williams about that. And it's funny, like, he was just like such a laid back guy talking about the main theme for Matt Damon. He was like, yeah, it's just kind of like a typical dumb warrior sound. And I was like, you're very underselling yourself.
Sure. That's funny. I love that. Well, what do you got next?
I've got The Batman by Michael Giacchino. Look, any entry into a Batman film, Batman series for the music is tough, because I think it might actually be hard to come up with a character that has a better pantheon of music than Batman. I mean,
Sure.
You look at like the Danny Elfman scores, the Zimmer, James Newton Howard scores, even the the Batman animated series with Shirley Walker and her team, like tons of great music. So luckily, Giacono's well equipped to enter that world. But what I really like about it is there are kind of those big gothic elements that you come to expect with the sound of Batman. But with the main theme that he does for Batman, I think I'm the only person that ever says this, but like it actually really reminds me of Brad Feidel's theme for Terminator, where there's this relentlessness to it, kind of a really repetitive march ostinato, and it really inhabits the character of someone they are relentless. They're, no matter what happens, no matter how many obstacles they have, their inability to understand Spanish, they're going to keep going, and then eventually they're going to get you. And it's just such a good musical interpretation of that. And I think as the score released too, it's like maybe 90 or 100 minutes. It's a long score. Most of the time I hate that. I think, like, look, trim it down a little bit. At least for me, that score flies by sitting down listening to it.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you're mentioning the length, because that's probably the number one thing that kept it off my list, because I agree with you about the main theme. It is maybe the best, or certainly the most memorable theme that we've gotten these last 5 years. It is just so damn good. The score itself is just so long. There's just so much to it, but it's very good from beginning to end. But that theme is the main standout for me, for sure. Yeah, great one there. I will go to a much quieter one for my next one, and that is Minari from 2020.
Ooh.
Emil Massari, who really wowed me the year before with Last Black Man in San Francisco, and then followed it up like immediately that next year with Lee Isaac Chung's very personal, small story, and quickly just became like a favorite. And he hasn't really done that much since then. I don't know, but still, it's just such a beautiful score that, combines a lot of more traditional elements of their Korean culture, but also with just kind of an Americana feel, because that is what it is, an immigrant story, kind of figuring out their new life in this new place. And it's just a gorgeous score, really beautiful music, and something that kind of mixes that melancholy with a idea of like possibility. And I think that it really gets to that feeling of like, well, this is going to be hard, but we're going to do it because it's the only thing that we can do. And I think the score really kind of sells that really well. And by the way, not on my list, another 2024 movie, but I love the Twister score. It's
Really?
just so much fun. I think it's a great score.
I'll talk about Minari in a second. Twisters, that was one I know a lot of people liked. It didn't really resonate with me. Also, though, I think I turned the movie off after about 20 minutes because I was
Mm.
like, I can watch something else. So
You have to watch it in
send
the
me all the
theater.
hate.
That's the thing. You got to see it in 4DX with everybody screaming and getting shaken around. It was fun. Yeah.
Fair enough. But yeah, I totally agree. Minari, definitely one of the best of like the last 5 years so far. I think it was really clever of him mixing those elements rather than it. I think a really obvious choice would be, oh, it's a Korean family in America. Like, let's have all this Korean styled music. And I think
All right.
that just ends up being too overt, too clunky, and the use instead is so subtle and so well mixed in that it really does kind of create the musical version of the immigrant story and the mixing of these cultures. So that's a great one.
Right on. Right on. Well, what do you got next?
All right, well, I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to include two scores merged together.
Mm.
So Dune parts 1 and 2. And
Okay.
the reason I don't count it as cheating is because once Dune 2 got disqualified from the best original score for the Oscars, Hans Zimmer and Denis Villeneuve kept going on and on about how it's really just one score. So I'm treating it as just one score.
Yeah.
Maybe like the best part about this is just the scope of this score. It's this big galactic story spanning all these planets. And so you have like this immense palette of sounds. You've got bagpipes for the Atreides at times, really harsh, weird sounds for the Harkonnens. Got Mongolian throat singing thrown in for the Sardaukar. And I was reading, I think, something, a snippet in Dune Messiah where like talking about how Genghis Khan was a very distant ancestor of those people. So like you
Yeah.
have actually like a really clever little tie-in that not many people are going to notice. Also, with the comment I made about Reznor and Ross, I think it's easy for Hans Zimmer at this point to put his name on something, have his team come up with a score. He's involved, does some thematic work, and calls it a day.
Yeah.
And I think Dune is the first time in a while that he's been like really, really, really invested in it. He clearly loves the story, the books. I think he's like been a fan since he was a kid. And so I think you can hear that come out because it's something that he cares much more about. So when you listen to it, listen really carefully. There's a couple of well-known main themes at this point, but there's also so much really subtle thematic material, really subtle motifs littered throughout. When you listen to both scores back to back, it ends up being a really rewarding listening experience because it does mirror Paul's arc so well. Like starting with the hope and the danger that he's facing, and all the way at the end. I was listening to it earlier and felt like a serrated knife's edge. We were like, oh, he's won, and at what cost? And then you've got a big sound and it ends, and you're like, oh, yeah, I don't think things are going to go very well for the universe after this.
Sure. Yeah, Hans Zimmer is somebody who he could just rest on being Hans Zimmer and he just
Yeah.
keeps pushing. He just keeps pushing it. And yeah, watching those movies in the theater in IMAX the way it's, meant to be, and just hearing that sound just absolutely destroy you. It's wild. Didn't make my list, but it is super, super impressive. And I don't think you can be into film scores and not be excited to see what he's going to do next.
Yeah.
And yeah, he really just knocked it out of the park with both of those. So definitely belongs in this conversation for sure. I will go to our most recent Oscar winner for Best Original Score with The Brutalist from Daniel Bloomberg. This is just an amazing score to complement the epic film that Brady Corbett put together here. I think, again, to talk about main themes, I think the main theme is, going to stand the test of time as like one of the best scores of this era right now. The rest of the score is fantastic too. It's so varied and it's beautiful in all different kinds of ways, depending on, which section of the film we're in. It's obviously a very long film. There's a lot of music in it, but it gets everywhere to the highest highs, the lowest lows, everything in between. And as big as something like the main theme can be, is just as like small and intimate as some of like the more piano based stuff is, and really just runs the gamut of so many great sounds. And I'm really excited to hear more from Daniel Bloomberg from this point forward. I think seems like an interesting fellow, and I'm curious to see what he takes on next.
All right, so because I have no set order in mind, I'm going to jump onto The Brutalist as well. That was
Okay.
one of my two 2024 scores, and I totally agree. I was so floored by it. First, though, I'll say this was one of my two 2024 scores. Weirdly, my favorite 2024 score, I'm not including on this list because I can't say that it's the best, and people will call me an idiot for including it. That would have been Arab music score for Aggro Drift. But
Hell yeah.
so sorry, everyone, that's not going to be on this list. But The Brutalist, right from the beginning, and I know it's been commented on a lot, but you can't say enough about the opening couple minutes when Laszlo's on the ship in what feels like a sequence out of an Alien movie, where
Yeah.
it feels like this derelict ship. You don't know what's going on. It's chaos, it's madness, and then the doors open, the light pours in, the Statue of Liberty's there, and that theme pours in this moment of absolute triumph, and it wows you. I mean, at least for me, like really chills you, and it's like, how much better can you show that moment? The hope that someone who was in the camps, survived World War II, now coming to start a new life, feels in that moment. But like
Yeah.
you said, it is so varied. Again, I'm going to be annoying here. I did talk to Daniel about it, and I think one of the really impressive things is there's been a lot of coverage on how it was a relatively low budget indie film.
Yeah.
When that happens, it means you don't have much money for the score either. And it was a really low budget guerrilla way of doing it. So the intermission, for instance, was done by the pianist John Tilbury. And it is very much like Daniel was hanging out in John Tilbury's shed where he keeps his piano. And he just put a bunch of mics everywhere and they just recorded piano over and over for days. And that became this. Or one of the things he did for the Carrera sequence, he went to the marble mine, shot a gun in the quarry, recorded the sound, and then used that as reverb for the music in those sequences. So There's just so much really wild creativity going in this. And obviously he's had a good indie music career prior to this. But I mean, he's I don't know, 34 years old, still, in my opinion, very young, very early on in this music career. So it's really exciting seeing him already do these things and then being like, okay, what's coming next?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, that opening sequence, I mean, that is just the marriage of everything that filmmaking is all about, and music being a huge, huge part of that. So yeah, obviously, fantastic work there. I will go on to another 2024 movie, although really I could have went with the previous movie in the series, which is also from the last 5 years. I'm going with Smile 2 from Cristobal Tapia de Veer, who is another of the exciting kind of finds of this particular decade so far. I mean, he has done such incredible stuff between this and The White Lotus. Also, I thought his score was the best part of Baby Girl. But yeah, he is a really interesting composer, very strange music, and somebody who every time I hear something that he does, I'm just kind of like, how is he even doing this? Like, it's so weird and so out there, but all reined in a way that it still is like a really great score that fits the film perfectly and fits what's happening and adds to the just real unsettling nature of these Smile movies. I think Smile 2 for me stood out more so because the score blends in really well with the synth sound of our central character, who is a pop singer, Sky Riley. And so her songs, which also just happen to be awesome. I mean, that's the soundtrack, not necessarily the score, but the synth work in what he was previously doing in the first Smile of all these just very weirdly chopped and stuttered sounds, adding those synths into it just kind of tied it all together in a really neat way. And yeah, it's just some of the most unsettling music that I've heard in any movie. Again, Cristobal Tapia de Veer is a really interesting composer. Somebody I'm interested to see just how far out there his stuff gets as we continue on forward.
So Smile 2 was actually my other 2024 score.
Okay.
I'll talk about it in a little bit so we don't do, two piggybacked ones. But the one thing I'll say about it right now is who had the better songs, Sky Riley or Lady Raven?
All respect to the Shyamalan family, but Sky Riley is like the hit of 2024. I mean, her songs just rule.
Oh, yeah. I think she's a better dancer, too.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Sticking with the more low-budget, impressive scores, my next one is The Green Knight by Daniel Hart. I remember listening to this, watching it, and then looking up, and this has like a $15 million budget. And is like one of the most amazing, fascinating looking films. But again, because of that, not a lot of money is available for the score. Despite all of that, you have this unbelievable historical fantasy score that really tricks you into it being like an authentic piece. Daniel Hart wrote some original faux medieval songs that the first time I heard it, certainly thought that they were actually like renditions of period music. Nope, totally made up, although he spent the time, did the work, researched music from that period, and then did create his own version of it. So you have this great sense of a medieval sound, but then also because it's a medieval fantasy world where magic is real, these wild creatures are actually real things that the characters, when they come across them, aren't particularly thrown off by. So to do that, he's also throwing in a bunch of electronics, a bunch of synth, just going all the way out there. And how are you going to have a longing medieval song, like folk song, and like really weird, surreal synth music, basically side by side?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it totally works here.
No, it's a great one. You know what? I actually should have revisited this one. I didn't get a chance to revisit it. A Ghost Story was on my top 10 of last decade talking about scores, and I think that he's scoring David Lowery's next film, so I can't wait to see what that's going to be like. But yeah, the Green Knight score is great, and also that kind of fits in with the Gretel and Hansel with that kind of mix of tones.
Definitely.
So no, it's a great one, and I'm probably going to go listen to that very soon after we finish recording this because, I didn't think to go back to that one, but great pick there. I will go yet another 2024 one. Sorry, guys. I'm going with Conclave, the Volker Bertelmann film or score. I think personally this was probably the Brutalist's main competitor at the Oscars last month, but I think this is just a fantastic piece of music. I know a lot of people are kind of down on him because All Quiet on the Western Front, they didn't think that should have won, and so he's kind of had that target on his back ever since. But I think that he really came up with an interesting approach to this particular score, and that is that it's such a small drama, but these guys, these cardinals in this room, believing that what they're doing is the most important thing to ever happen, basically, to score it like this big giant drama with the big Brahms and all that stuff. And I mean, I think it's just the perfect way to score it, especially for a movie that is kind of, it's not, I don't want to say it's poking fun at their rituals and stuff, but it certainly is kind of playing with the pomp and circumstance of it all. And I think the score adds to that and really kind of gives the film its sense of humor in a way, and the idea of just how important these guys think that what they're doing is, and the score just really, really sells that and is a big part of why the movie works so damn well. So yeah, I love this score, and I think it's so listenable and such a great part of the film, and the film as a whole is great too.
I think that's a great choice. I'm a big Volker Bertelmann fan. I'm a diehard All Quiet on the Western Front supporter as well, and love
Nice.
that, a few years later it's still regularly pissing people off.
Sure.
But I think like this was a great score. Like you said, it's really clever in how it both gives more importance to what these guys are doing and like makes the audience feel that way, but it also has a little wink, a little cheekiness. But the other thing too is this is a film that almost entirely takes place in, what is it, a cathedral or some Vatican building. I don't remember exactly what. There's cardinals, nuns everywhere. It's all about Catholicism. And so there are very obvious ways you could have done the music. And frankly, I think a lot of composers would have opted for something a bit more obvious, more chanting, Gregorian chants, like organ
Sure.
music, things that you immediately connect with Catholicism. Yet, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of that in there, but I don't really remember any of it. It somehow seems like it totally fits in with what these guys are doing, where they're at, and yet also avoids like every possible music cliche that would have gone along with it.
Yeah, if those traditional sounds are in there, they're drowned out by the big hits.
Yeah.
So, you don't even notice it.
My next one is The Personal History of David Copperfield by Christopher Willis. I think Chris Willis is like one of the most underrated composers right now. He did The Death of Stalin. I think that was 2018, 2019. Great score where he's like impersonating a 19th century, early 20th century Russian composer. He did the music for Veep, a few other things. He's been like really just under the radar, hoping that he can really break out because he's a super talented guy. This one, weirdly enough, I have 2 Dev Patel movies back to back, but it's like, it's such just like a really lovely, heartwarming, uplifting score. The string work is just really vibrant and soaring. And despite all that, it never really feels like it's sappy or too over the top and saccharine, which I think is so easy whenever you've got like a bit more optimistic, happy film. It's easy for the music to lean into that too much, and then you have to like roll your eyes a little bit. Amazing balance here. I hadn't listened to it for a couple years prior to us setting this up, and like the first few seconds of the first track, I was like, oh, I'm in just like such a wonderful mood already, and it
Nice.
continues throughout.
Right on, right on. Yeah, I never saw that movie actually. I remember when it came out, but I'll have to check it out and check out the score.
Yeah, it's a great one. I recommend it.
Right on. Well, I will go with, I've got to include it on my list. It's my number 1 from 2024. It is A Different Man. The
Ooh.
score is from Umberto Smorelli, who I'm not really familiar with his other work, but this is just a wonderful piece of music. Beautiful, haunting, aching, melancholy. It matches the weirdness of the film. These characters who, for anyone who hasn't seen A Different Man, it's about a guy with this facial deformity who undergoes this like weird sci-fi procedure to change his appearance, and of course he ends up looking like Sebastian Stan, shouldn't we all, but then a guy who may be his old self shows up. It gets weird. It gets very kind of surreal. And the film's score is very playful. It's very kind of noir feeling, but it's playing with the characters. It is playing into the strangeness of their situation, into the darkness of it, and also into the sci-fi elements of it as well. There's like a little bit of body horror in there as well, and it definitely plays into that too. And it's a score that I think has a very difficult balance to kind of pull off, and I think just absolutely does. And it's also one of the more listenable scores for me.
Yeah.
I could throw this one on and just It's just some really, really great music to just sit and listen to.
That was one where I don't know what happened, but somehow it didn't get any traction among like anybody. But
Yeah.
that score on its own and in the film is so good. I mean, like you said, somehow it's balancing the seriousness, but also the playfulness, and also the sci-fi, and also the uncomfortable aspects. And it's doing that while almost always having that sort of jazzy noirish sound. So
Hmm.
it's covering so much ground without ever really deviating from its core identity. One sequence that I love in that is after he first wakes up as looking like Sebastian Stan, there is like a true like noir throwback where he's walking down the city streets at night and you're seeing neon lights and the lights coming out of storefronts and car headlights, and the music is almost so over the top of
Yeah.
like playing into this noirish bit, and then like he just crashes into a bar and gets drunk.
Yeah.
And it is great. And like I think that was, I don't know anything about that composer either. That was definitely one of the great surprises of 2024 for me as well.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm glad you agree on that one. Yeah. Great, great piece of music.
We're almost near the end. I've got a bit of a weird one here. Is Crypto Zoo by John Carroll Kirby. So this is a film that I don't really like. It's a visually pretty cool animated film from I think 2021, 2022 that follows a crypto zoo. But by crypto, it's referring to cryptids, imaginary creatures
Okay.
from legend, from lore. So dragons and chupacabras and all sorts of crazy things. There's a satyr as well, like just all sorts of weird stuff. Cool animation style. John Carroll Kirby, I think this is the only film score he's ever done. It's kind of like a modern take on Exotica, not something that you really hear much anymore.
Hmm.
So he's like really playing into a lot of world elements because part of the film is these characters traveling all over the world trying to find these different creatures. So it is just so out there, so unique. I'm never going to revisit the film ever again, but like I love revisiting the score because the palette is so unusual, something that you very rarely hear, but it also has like some really great catchy melodies in it through. I think maybe coming from his background as just more of like a pure songwriter doing his own thing, it all just clicks here.
Interesting. I haven't even heard of this movie. Yeah. And
I think I'm its lone defender, at
hey,
least for the score.
movies like that need us out there, right? So absolutely. I feel like I'm the lone defender of the next movie I'm about to bring up, and that is Windfall from 2022.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I love this score so much. It's from Danny Bensi and Sonder Jurians. It was a Netflix movie that kind of came and went. Starred Jason Segel and forget, I didn't write them all down. But anyway, Jesse Plemons
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Lily Collins. Is that her name? Anyway, it's a really fun little, very Hitchcock inspired thriller that, again, like my last pick, leans into the noir kind of aspects of it. It also kind of gets into almost a Looney Tunes ish kind of thing. Like it just kind of, to me, the score feels like it is egging on these characters to make bad decisions. For anyone who hasn't seen Windfall, it's about a guy who thinks he's got the perfect plan to go rob this tech billionaire's house, thinking that they're going to be away for the weekend. But then they show up and his plan goes to shit. And then from there, they all kind of can't get away from one another within this house. And it's a fun little cat and mouse single location thriller. And the score is just, it's fun. It's just a really fun score. It is playful. It is silly. It is really good. And it just really keeps this little tight little movie just going and going. And like I said, the movie itself is very Hitchcock inspired. The score also, you hear it in there totally. Like, that that's what they're going for, but they're going for it in a way that's not parody, but at the same time is just having fun with the idea of, we all know how these kind of movies go. We've seen them a million times over. Let's have some fun with it and do something fresh and unique with it. And this is a movie that just did not kind of catch on, but I have been kind of banging the drum for it for a while now, and I love it.
It's funny because I remember seeing you talk about the score multiple times in 2022 and probably early 2023. First, like for the film itself, you got to kind of wonder why it didn't catch on because you see so many people complain about like, oh, where are the adult-oriented, lower to mid-budget films? And it's like,
Sure.
here's a perfect one. I mean, I don't remember exactly how long it was, but it's like a pretty quick-moving, sleek film. There's all sorts of twists and turns. It's serious, but not too serious because there's fun, there's cheekiness, there's playfulness too. Like it really checks a lot of the boxes. The score really surprised me because Danny Bensi and Sondra Jarians, I think they're more known for doing a lot of dark textural work, particularly in
Sure.
TV. Yeah, like I think they did Ozark, they did Tokyo Vice, really, really serious films.
Yeah.
And I think this was a great outlet for them to be like, hey, we can also have fun and we can use melody and we can do something that, yeah, this is like what you're used to, the exact opposite. So I think that's a great entry, a great underappreciated one because, like you said, you are the lone windfall defender and
Yeah.
bless you for it, man.
There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're on to our number ones, or like my number one, your last pick. But what do you got?
And if the listeners are paying close attention, you know I've got Smile to Cristobal Tapia de Veer.
Yeah.
Like you, I wasn't really familiar with him up until a couple years ago, and then like I've just been floored. And now it seems like with Smile 2, Baby Girl, and White Lotus, he's like suddenly become known among people, which is awesome. Smile 2, I love it. I mean, for a bunch of reasons. The main reason being it is so abrasive towards its audience.
Mm,
The first Smile already had a great palette of really rough sounds to punish the listener, the viewer. Smile 2 cranks it up even more. I think for a lot of horror, the extent that you're going to get that is like in those piercing stingers to signal a jump scare. But like you have to go back to some of the music in The Shining or something to really get much more aggressive towards the audience music.
mm.
No, you don't hear it as much. So I just love that aspect of it, but it's also full of really unusual synth sounds. If you're into that, also listen to Alien Romulus, which is a good one this year, not one of my favorites, but one that, or well, I say this year, 2024, that has a great synth palette too.
Yeah.
The other
Yeah.
thing with Smile 2 especially comes clear when you listen to it on its own. There's a lot of use, like you mentioned, of synth and sounds adjacent to the Sky Riley pop songs, but there's also like these really warped auto-tuned vocals that come in here and there that are like so pained and dying. And I mean, I sound like a sadist, but like, it's just it sounds so awesome. And I think one of the only other recent scores that had a similar effect for me was Colin Stetson's score for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel from a couple years ago, which like I
Yeah.
mean, I actually really like that film, but Stetson's score also just hyper violent and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you know, if you're a sicko like me, what more do you want?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You watch that Smile 2, or you listen to the score and you're just like, oh God, I don't even want to be alive right now. This is terrible. This is too much. Well, I mentioned I'd be bringing it up again later. It's my number one. It's Oppenheimer. It's the most embarrassingly obvious choice to have a Nolan film score as your number one, but when it's this good, it's just completely undeniable. Ludwig Göransson created something here that I really genuinely think, forget about this decade, we're going to be talking about it for decades and decades to come, just how good this score is. I mean, it's great within the context of the film as well. Don't get me wrong. I think that the music somehow does this weird thing of mirroring the nuclear reactors going, like, you know, all the fission and things. It feels like it's the scientific processes that are going on, which is just insane that he managed to come up with something that would do that. But then just listening to it on its own, it's just like an hour of just, or 2 hours of incredible music that just keeps going and keeps going. But if you go back to the main theme, though, I don't know if it would be considered that Can You Hear the Music? You know,
Yeah.
it's just such an incredible piece that is alone my favorite piece of music that I've heard this decade so far. And yeah, everything you said about it earlier, I would echo there. And yeah, Nolan, he somehow manages to get this stuff out of his composers, and whether it's obvious or not, it's undeniable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I talked about it earlier. All I'll say, reiterating once again, I mean, can you hear the music? Killer on its own. When you hear it in the theaters, Dave, I know that you saw it in theaters. I saw it in IMAX. Like, you sit and you're like, holy smokes, that just knocks
Yeah.
you on your ass. And it comes pretty early, and you're like, what do the next 2.5 hours have in store for me? And I mean,
Yeah.
like, what more do you want from a film, from the music, from the imagery, like, to just floor you and keep you glued to your seat for 3 hours, and then for it to be something that's going to be talked about for years and years? Like, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. It's funny. I hadn't thought about this in advance, but like forever now as a composer, like whenever I get a film and there's like temp music, it's like at least 9 times out of 10, it's Hans Zimmer, I feel like if somebody gave me temp music and it was Ludwig Göransson, I'd just be like, pass. I can't do this. Sorry. I can't do this one, but.
All right. So there's the 10 from each of us. Did you have any notable or unusual near misses that almost made your 10, were in the running, and you left off?
Yeah, I did write down a few. Well, I had already mentioned Blonde from your list,
Yeah.
was one I was definitely considering. Also, Shiva Baby from Ariel Marx,
Ooh.
which I think that is a score that really kind of set the tone for a lot of like indie horror of the last 5 years. So it's a really interesting one. Sisu, which is a score that I have been championing for a while now. It's very hard to find. I don't know why. That score has never been given a proper release, and you can only find it in random people's YouTube channels, but really, really good stuff. I'll also throw No One Will Save You from Joseph Trepanese, which I think is a great little sci-fi score. And last one, May December, Marcelo Zarvos, based on the Michael Legrand piano motif. Really just a great score that is just so sure of itself. Like, it just goes for it. And I like that in a score, when it's like just, it's all in on an idea and it just goes for it.
I gotta keep saying, we've talked about the score for Sisu before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I enjoyed it, but like, I don't know what you see in it, but that's one of the beautiful things of just having like these differing opinions.
Yeah.
It is baffling that it's never been released, especially because the film itself had a pretty decent little splash when it came out.
Yeah.
For me, the one that immediately comes to mind is, and this makes me feel like such a meathead, but The Covenant by Christopher Benstead for Guy Ritchie's film. Even though it feels like a straightforward action movie when you just look at it from the surface, that main motif, it's really melancholic, it's really heavy, it really shows the depth that this, quote, covenant has between Jake Gyllenhaal's character and his Afghan interpreter, and like the lengths that he'll go to see it through. But also, like, it reminds me of the little bit that Jim Cameron added at the end of, what was it, Rambo 2 or 3, about the Mujahideen fighters, like,
Oh, yeah.
where it also carries a heavier weight of what's happened to these Afghan interpreters, how much they sacrificed, and yet were kind of left behind. And Benstead's score very much carries that weight. And like, I couldn't quite bring it on, and it actually like missed my best of, what was it, 2022, 2023 scores, and then hearing it enough times, I was like, oh, this is actually like a sneakily really good piece of music.
Sure. No, that's a very interesting pick there.
One other one, I gotta give Howard Shore some love. Crimes of the Future.
That's a good one.
Yeah, really cool sci-fi score. But I think my favorite thing about it is Howard Shore's like 75 years old, and there are like 3 killer futuristic dance tracks in there that are just kind of background music for these art show exhibitions. And you listen to them on their own, and it's like, this is heavy danceable stuff. Like, I don't know what's still cooking in Howard Shore's head, but let's go.
Yeah, he out Trent Reznor on that score. So yeah, it's a cool one for sure.
For sure. Well, Dave, we'll circle back in 5 years and
Sure.
and do the whole decade.
I love it. Thanks so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun, Nick.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about some of our favorite film scores of the 2020s so far. Thank you to Nick Marcus of The Film Scorer for joining me on that one. And thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you're subscribed. We got so many episodes on the way. I've got 4 live shows lined up right now. First up, well, actually, there might be one sooner than the first up, but we might be doing the Alto Nights this Thursday at Maya Cinemas. It's going to be a very last minute confirmation, so keep an eye out on my socials at Piecing Pod. We might be doing the Alto Nights, but then we've got Death of a Unicorn on Saturday, March 29th. We've got Screamboat on Thursday, April 3rd. Both of those are at Downtown Cinemas. And then we'll be back at Maya Cinemas for The Amateur on Thursday, April 10th. And who knows, maybe we'll be doing more. It's been a crazy year already with these live shows, and there's so much fun to do. So as many as I'm able to do, I am going to just keep adding them on, and we'll record some regular episodes too along the way because, that's what we do around here. So anyway, lots of piecing it together on the way, so make sure you're subscribed. You can follow me on social media at Piecing Pod. Don't forget, we do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. And speaking of which, we're talking film scores. Every so often between my regular David Rosen albums, I will release a film score as its own, original motion picture soundtrack album. But the scores that I don't release that way, I end up putting together album releases for the Patreon as exclusives, and I've got at least 2, maybe 3 of those that will be going up this year. Films that I scored, they're great. I'm very proud of them, but I just didn't feel that they need their own full album release to be, up there on the Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff. But the music is good, and so maybe you'll want to check it out. It'll all be on the Patreon. So the Produced by David Rosen Patreon is at patreon.com/bydavidrosen. And I'm going to play a piece of music, as I always do to close out these episodes, from a film I scored in the 2020s. Actually, this is one of the most recent films I scored. It's called The Angel of Death, and you can't see it yet. It'll be out soon. I think they're finishing up a little bit more post stuff. But this was a collaboration with Christopher Johnson, a director I've worked with many times, and I'm actually going to be working on his next feature very soon. I'm going to be starting on that in the next couple of weeks here. But this is the ending theme from The Angel of Death. So hope you enjoy it. We'll be back for more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.